What's happening in Venezuela today is not an isolated outburst of geopolitical drama. The situation has deep roots in a century long story of oil, foreign involvement, and competing visions of sovereignty. It begins in the early 20th century, when oil was first drilled in Venezuela around 1913, transforming a primarily agrarian society into one of the world's most important petroleum producers. By the late 1920s, Venezuela had become a leading oil exporter, drawing significant foreign investment, especially from U.S. companies like Standard Oil, Gulf Oil, and later Exxon and Chevron. This early involvement positioned Venezuela at the center of global energy markets and international politics. For decades, Venezuela's oil revenue transformed the country's economy, funding its modernization and urban growth, but it also made the country deeply dependent on energy exports. That dependency shaped both domestic politics and foreign relations, and by the 1970s, Venezuela nationalized its oil industry, creating the state oil company PDVSA to control crude production and export revenue. From that point forward, oil became both the backbone of the state and a fault line for conflict. Throughout the late 20th and early 21st centuries, Venezuela's political leadership swung between alignment with U.S. interests and confrontation with them, and by the time Hugo Chavez rose to power in 1999, his Bolivarian socialist agenda made oil policy a key tool of the country's political sovereignty and anti imperialist symbolism. Chavez pushed for greater state control, regional alliances with countries like Cuba and Russia, and a foreign policy often at odds with Washington. Under Chavez and his successor Nicolas Maduro, the reliance on oil revenue only intensified even as mismanagement, corruption, and sanctions eroded PDVSA's capacity. Output, once among the highest in the world, fell sharply, largely due to sanctions. Traditionally, the United States was one of Venezuela's largest customers. In the mid 2000s, Caracas exported over 1 million barrels per day to U.S. refineries, but after sanctions were imposed in 2014 and intensified in 2019, trade with the U.S. all but ceased by the mid 2020s. These sanctions aimed to pressure the Maduro regime over corruption, but they also weakened Venezuela's oil sector, crippling the country's economy. Meanwhile, China emerged as a major buyer and investor, filling that gap. Chinese imports of Venezuelan crude approached 470,000 barrels per day by 2025, and Chinese firms invested billions in the oil sector infrastructure as well as debt arrangements, helping keep Venezuela connected to global markets despite Western sanctions. But the U.S. response under the Trump administration, including military actions, sanctions escalation, and direct attempts to reshape Venezuela's leadership, represents the most dramatic phase in this long history. U.S. strikes and blockades of oil tankers have paralyzed exports, and sanctions on Venezuelan oil firms and vessels are aimed at cutting off revenue streams. At the same time, Chevron remains the only major U.S. oil company with a special license to operate in Venezuela, a legacy of its century long presence and ongoing strategic importance. Taken together, these developments underscore a broader pattern, as oil in Venezuela has always been more than a commodity. It's a strategic asset with implications for national sovereignty, international alliances, and global economic dynamics. What once made Venezuela a partner in the Western Hemisphere's energy system has over time become a point of contention, competition, and now an invasion. Today's shifts aren't just about oil anymore, but how the world balances power, sovereignty, and economic interdependence in an era where old assumptions about rules and order are being tested.